Well, welcome everybody to the final event of the season here at City Lights. I'm Peter Maravellis, your host. To those of you online, welcome to you too, and thank you for joining us. As always, we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples. It is always an honor and a privilege to be able to do so. So tonight's event is brought to you by the For Columbus Foundation, Baraka Books, in conjunction with City Lights. We are celebrating the publication of Blind Persistence, the history of the Before Columbus Foundation. It is edited by Ishmael Reed and Justin Demange, together with Carla Blank and Tennessee Reed. So the Before Columbus Foundation was founded in 1976 by Ishmael Reed, together with a like-minded group of writers, with the goal of championing contemporary American multicultural literature. The premise at the heart of the foundation is that storytelling traditions existed thousands of years before the arrival of Europeans to this continent, which counters the myth that storytelling begins with Puritans. Well, it doesn't. And if you visited City Lights and browsed through our shelves, you know that for sure. The foundation established the American Book Awards in 1978, which has recognized hundreds of writers who otherwise would have been ignored. So they really are a great community building organization. Its board of directors includes three MacArthur Fellows, a former U.S. Poet Laureate, a Pulitzer Prize, actually several Pulitzer Prize winners, a winner of the Booker Prize, and a recipient of the Presidential Medal of Honor. So the foundation has played an important role in the literary and cultural life of the Bay Area as well as the nation. So Blind Persistence is the Before Columbus story as told by a host of leading American poets, novelists, and public intellectuals. Contributors include Wajahat Ali, Carolyn Forche, Joy Harjo, Henry Louis Gates Jr., amongst many others. So we are deeply, deeply honored to have with us tonight Ishmael Reed. He's going to be in conversation with Justin Demange, and also joining us will be Sean Wong, and we have a mystery guest as well, who will be introduced shortly. So Ishmael Reed has authored 50 works of fiction, poetry, nonfiction, plays, and librettos, and edited numerous anthologies. He's received many honors for his work, including in every category. So he's one of the country's great literary treasures. Justin Demange is chairman of the Before Columbus Foundation, administrator of the American Book Awards, and creator of the radio broadcast New Day Jazz. Member of the board of directors of the Oakland Book Festival, Mr. Demange is also a program producer at the African American Center of the San Francisco Public Library. His poetry and journalism has appeared in Americana, Black Renaissance Noir, Drum Voices Review, amongst others. We're also very happy to have Sean Wong. He's the author of two prize-winning novels, Home Base and American Knees, and the editor and co-editor of 6 Asian American and American multicultural literary anthologies. His second novel, American Knees, was made into an award-winning film. He is currently professor of English and the Byron and Alice Lockwood Professor in the Humanities at the University of Washington. So we're going to make a little bit of time at the end for a Q&A. For those of you online, we ask that you please post your questions in the chat. I am now going to turn the mic over to Justin Demange, who will be moderating the evening. Welcome to you all.
Thank you so much, Peter. And for those of you who are keeping a scorecard at home, our mystery guest is Gundars Strauds, the executive director of the Before Columbus Foundation, who has really been the engine that has kept the organization moving forward for now 50 years. Gundar Strauds, I'm very pleased to find him joining us. There's an awful lot of activists, as they're called these days, and I think in terms of the culture wars, perhaps too many activists and not enough organizers. Organizers being those who mobilize and direct by meeting the people where they are at. I think that's one of the distinguishing characteristics of the board of directors of the Before Columbus Foundation, and most particularly in its beginnings. So I would like to start there because we're talking about an era of cultural revolution. And the Before Columbus Foundation undoubtedly is born in the crucible of that cultural revolution, which here in the San Francisco Bay Area for a period of years during the 1970s, as quiet as it's kept today, was actually teetering on a political revolution. When we consider the Cultural Revolution, we understand that at that time, we're talking about 1975, 1976, anti-imperialist struggle all over the world, which was necessarily multicultural, was being fanned to a high flame and had enormous impact on the literature that was emerging from the Bay Area. So, as a way of getting this conversation going, I would only hasten to point out that at this late date, 25 years into the 21st century, it is precisely this history, which I have mentioned just moments ago, that is under duress, that is under violent erasure, that the inscription of that same violence, which is attempting to erase all of this history, has been directed most exclusively at organizations that are multicultural. So, as the founders of this organization, Ishmael, Sean, Gundars, today, right now, what are the key elements that you see missing from this story that need to be understood by audiences when they are reflecting on this struggle? Ishmael? Oh, we did. Oh, I see.
Excuse me. Well, the Cultural Revolution ended in the early 70s, and they lost. And so now this decadent settler elite is left to, in their decadence, decorating golden ballrooms and some of the one of the reasons that we organized was because of the corruption of the cultural institutions in the East.
Mhm.
An example of that are the Pulitzers, which have a scandal every year. And Columbia University, which presides over the Pulitzers, just yielded to Donald Trump. So my question is, should they any longer preside over the Pulitzer Prizes?
Mhm.
Are they going to give Melania one?
Mhm.
You know, these are some very serious questions.
Mhm.
So I say, well, what about Howard University or the University of New Mexico administering the Pulitzers?
Mhm.
So that's one of the reasons we organized this before Columbus in the West, is because of the decadence of some of the foundations in the East, which are owned by corporations. For example, one of the sponsors or the owners of the National Book Foundation is somebody from the Ralph Lauren. I thought they made clothes. I didn't know they made books or they published books. So this is a challenge to what's going on in the East, where we are limited to tokenism, devos and divas. The problem with devos and divas is that they might overshadow all of the members of a certain ethnic group who might write as well or better. So that's what we organize for. Now, getting back to our original theory about thousands of years of storytelling existing in North America before the arrival of the English. And if you look at the cover of the book, do you have it? One of our former presidents, the late Andrew Hope, was a Tlingit leader. I'm posing with him in Sitka, Alaska, and behind him is what tourists call totem poles. These are books that are read vertically from top to bottom, like some of the pictographs you find in Asia, and they tell a story of different clans. We consider this to be storytelling. So when I went to Germany, the title of my lecture was 10,000 Years of American Storytelling. And people called in and asked, was that a typo?
Mhm.
So we started out with Gundars. We had a very shabby audience, office, shabby audience, shabby office down on 4th Street.
Yeah.
We had nothing.
Mhm.
At one point, I said, "Goodness, how are we going to make it? We only have $5,000. That's all we had, $5,000 from the Ford Foundation." Gundars gave me a great answer: blind persistence. And that's how we've been making it for 50 years. We do not depend upon corporate grants. Once in a while, we get a grant. And what happened was, I came back from Harvard. My neighborhood had been taken over 2 crack operations. So I wrote, I was writer in residence for Willie Hurst, San Francisco Examiner. And I wrote an expose of what was going on there. The cops were coming over. They were taking bribes. They were of no use. So the articles got me the attention of the developer of a civic center in downtown Oakland. And we met with the mayor, and he gave us this wonderful office that we've had, how many, 20 years?
Oh,
More than 20 years. In Preservation, beautiful Preservation Park. So and then we got a Peace in Time magazine. But that's how we do it. I want to give a salute to Al Young, the late Al Young. He and I did a magazine called Yardbird. And that was another way we had, there it is, Yardbird. 3 years was edited by Sean Wong, Frank Chen. But that's another way that we were able to express multiculturalism. And Bob Callahan, the great Bob Callahan. It was Bob Callahan who changed us from a third world group to a multicultural group because he said we were discriminating against white ethnics. You remember that? He was calling us racist. Although we had you a
racist.
Oh, okay.
Not me. Well, remember, he also pointed out that when the Irish first came over to New York City, that they were using the same slang that they were referring to black people, only using them on the Irish now because they were at the bottom of the totem pole.
Well, he told us that the first plantations were in Ireland. We didn't know anything about that. We saw white people as the same when I was growing up. There were no ethnic differences. The Jewish guys and Italian guys, they were like us, but we didn't know their history. But we learned more about different ethnic groups in this country before Columbus than we learned in so-called formal education, which is an Anglo assimilation deal. Leonard Pelletier, he said the purpose of the Anglo education is take the Indian out of the Indian, the Chinese out of the Chinese, the Irish out of the Irish, I'm extending, and Italian out of the Italian.
And to rationalize slavery.
Absolutely. So anyway, we're 50 years old next year.
That's right.
We've given hundreds of people awards over the years, people who would not be recognized. And the only place that ignores us is the New York Times. Because they're a hometown newspaper. They look even more like a village newspaper if you look at the world. They will not recognize us because they have these other things, Pulitzer Prize and National Book Foundation. And so they even wrote a piece against us. It's in the book where we had the title American Book Awards first. They even wrote articles acknowledging that we had something called the American Book Awards because we had the first 2 celebrations in New York, right? They wrote a piece called The Short-Lived American Book Awards. So that's what you're up against. I'll let somebody else talk.
Asymmetrical warfare.
That's right. Yeah, they basically changed their name.
Yes. Sean, you recently retired from the University of Washington.
No, I'm still working.
Oh, you are?
He's still too young to retire.
This question will perhaps be...
I've been thinking about retiring.
Yeah. This question perhaps relationship to before Columbus will be even more poignant then, as you're still a employee of the university. But as Ishmael was pointing out, despite much of the division and argument that has taken place between the Anglo-American establishment in the academy and in the Northeast in terms of publishing, the impact of the Before Columbus Foundation, most specifically the American Book Award program, has in fact changed the landscape of how American literature is perceived and read in colleges and universities all across the country. When we look at the initial stages of the organization, going back to its inception when it was a book distributor, and the American Book Awards program, which follows, it really does, at this point, read almost like a who's who of the most important and critical figures. But where I'm going with that is this. Right now, as I mentioned not long ago, this very history is under violent attack by the administration, by the federal government. Most of the institutions, academic institutions in America, have capitulated. At the time of the formation of the Before Columbus Foundation, there were 13 accredited programs in the United States that offered an MFA in creative writing. Now there's more than 250. Is that a good thing?
Wow, I did not think you were going to go to that question.
No, in all seriousness, I mean, because there has been, Reed would observe this. There has been a kind of flattening out in American literature, particularly in poetry.
Yeah, I think the Before Columbus Foundation was always an activist organization, and recognizing writers that went unrecognized, as well as recognizing publishers, small press publishers that were also trying to be forced out by major commercial presses and things like that. And so I emceed a lot of the early Before Columbus Foundation American Book Awards. And we always took a very activist approach, as well as almost like guerrilla theater. We went to the industry, the big book industry conventions, and essentially I stood up there on stage trying to shame big commercial publishers
And it worked.
Yeah, it worked. And often we would give awards to writers who are being published by small presses, as third world presses, as well as big commercial presses. And a lot of the commercial presses would not send representatives at first. And so we would stand up there, and it's an early form of social media shaming. And I would call out representatives from the big publishers, whose books had won, and I'd say, "Oh, is there a representative here from Random House?" And I would wait a beat, and nobody would come up to stage, And then later on at the convention, people would go by their booths and say, "Oh, you weren't at the American Book Awards last night, and you were recognized by the Before Columbus Foundation, and they waited for you, to show up." And slowly they came to us, because of that sort of a public shaming, especially within the industry. People. Paul Yamasaki remembers those award ceremonies, and our sort of our MO in terms of trying to get publishers to finally respond. And now, as Ishmael says, we've come full circle, where again we have to be in this sort of activist mode and to work against all the forces that are working against us.
They were all making fun of us in the beginning. Before Goodbye Columbus, they were, giving us all kind of sarcastic names. We have a sister organization called Penn Oakland that Tennessee is the chair of. And at our ceremony that occurred a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, the vice president of Alfred Knopf came out to get his award. And these writers come to our award ceremonies at their own expense. We get Don DeLillo. Don DeLillo, he's a hermit. He doesn't go anywhere. He came to one of our ceremonies. Edwidge Danticott came with her family. Gloria Naylor, John A. Williams, a number of writers come to our events at their own expense. And so at Bumbershoot, what was the name of we gave the award to Bezos.
Oh, yeah.
What's the name?
Yeah.
Mackenzie. Yeah.
She wrote under her maiden.
But we also award people with who are authors of chapbooks. Also at the Penn Oakland event, which is called by the New York Times the blue collar pen. A couple of people came from Italy to receive their awards. So I think this is I think this is the biggest challenge that the West has made against the Eastern domination of American letters. And they feel it because they have changed. It's because of our challenge, they've changed.
Mm-hmm.
And they have admitted more, Latinos and others. Now, I mentioned Hispanics or Latinos. Some people choose both or one or the other, or Latinx. The new editor of the New York Times Book Review is a Latino, a writer, George Cruz. So I said, are you guys going to now acknowledge the great renaissance in Hispanic writing that's occurred since the 1970s? He didn't reply because he's like guarding an Anglo fortress. That thing is so British that I was not surprised when the front page flew the Union Jack one time. I tried to debate the last editor of the New York Times Book Review, and she did not yield. I said, you got to recognize what's happening, lad. You guys are 50 years behind. She says her favorite bookstore is in London. I said, we're Americans. I mean, that leaves us out. So I think we have made a challenge here. And even though the West has produced great writers, Dashiell Hammett, Richard Brautigan, I don't want to mention Bret Hart because he's such a racist, right?
Jack London.
Well, both of them. Yeah, if I'm going to mention Bret Hart, I should mention Jack London. Both were terrible racists. As a matter of fact, Jack London called for the extermination of the Chinese, but he was a socialist for white people. I said that the Oakland Writers Group, or the big beginnings of Oakland writing, done by criminals, because Joaquin Miller was a stagecoach robber. Jack London was an oyster pirate, and so criminality in Oakland is nothing new.
I'd like to return to something very specific that Sean mentioned a few moments ago. Sean was talking to us about some of his activities that, in terms of strategy, would be considered easily confrontational in order to move ahead this agenda, which was so important to all of us before Columbus. But one of the things that Sean said was it was a lot like guerrilla theater. So I want to look at that a little more closely, because when we talk about the Cultural Revolution in which before Columbus emerged, one of the key facets of that period in American letters was the melding, was the blend of the theater arts with poetry. Those who were involved in poetry, Michael McClure, Ntozake Shange, were deeply involved in theater during this period of time. And part of that had to do with a very simple philosophy, which seems to have been all but lost in terms of American letters. And it is very simple. It holds together that the poet and the belief in the poem to be able to change not only the spiritual and material circumstances of the poet themselves, but change the spiritual and material circumstances of the world. And there's no question that that way of approaching literature was at the very center of what was giving birth to 19 Necromancers from Now, to Yardbird, to Wybird, and most decisively to the Before Columbus Foundation. But again, by contrast, this idea, not just the melding of poets with poets theater and guerrilla theater as a means towards gaining and maintaining cultural and political and economic and social power, that is not something that is current in American literature by any means. I'm not going to try to cynically suggest that it's lost, but it damn sure isn't present lately. Could you respond to that?
Thomas Pynchon was not on the cover of the New York Times Book Review. That's an example of the salesman taking over. Thomas Pynchon.
The salesman taking over. Could you elaborate on that?
Thomas Pynchon is probably the country's greatest writer. His first book in 10 years, just published. And first of all, they stalled for 3 or 4 weeks. And then finally, they did not put him on the cover of the New York Times Book Review because the salesman took over in the 70s. I mean, I got experimental books published because in the old days you had these so-called gentleman publishers, right? They take you off their taxes, like Roger Strauss or somebody like that. And then these big corporations took over. I think Bertelsmann, they published Mein Kampf.
Indeed.
They took over it. I mean, the publisher of Hitler took over Random House. I think they still run Random House.
And there it is.
And so that became the bottom line. And that caused friction between me and my good friend Toni Morrison. I mean, I love her. You know, I used to have lunch with her, I mean, you know, at Random House and everything, but she was opposed to experimental literature. We had a conflict over that because she opposed my presence at Random House. I was not the only so-called experimental writer that she rejected. She also rejected the Whig. I mean, you know.
Charles Wright.
Yeah. And Denby's books. One of the great William Denby, Carla, my wife and I published
Love Story Black.
No, Steve Cannon and I published.
Comus most recently.
Steve Cannon and I published Love Story, but we published King Comus, and the result of our publishing King Comus, Penguin finally is going to do all of his novels next year. But that was how he came to. But William Denby is a lost American writer because he lived in Rome. He collaborated with Antonioni and some of the other great filmmakers, Rossellini. So he was in exile, and he didn't have time to go to New York and network, which is like he had to get over, you know, go to parties and you know all that kind of stuff.
Social.
You gotta make deals, you know. And so she rejected him. So as a result, my contract was not renewed at Random House. The name of the novel was Flight to Canada, which gets its 50th anniversary edition next year, Flight to Canada. So I tell younger writers, I tell all writers, don't listen to these salesmen. They took over. I mean, the guy who runs McDonald's might take over Doubleday or something like that. So that's what happened in the 1970s. So in the 1960s, you still had these gentlemen publishers around. I got Paul Bearer's. Nobody would publish Paul Bearer's today. I got Norman Pritchard, N.H. Pritchard's Matrix, The Matrix, published at Doubleday. And now N.H. Pritchard is considered the forerunner of the language poets, according to Charles Bernstein. So that kind of book was abandoned. And I think what's happened to Thomas Pynchon is an example of how we're losing when it comes to publishing what you call mid-range authors or, you know, experimental fiction.
But this philosophy that was so key in informing the activity of the Cultural Revolution, in which forged the Before Columbus Foundation, this idea that literature itself could be used as a vehicle of gaining and maintaining social, political, economic power. Would you agree, Sean? You were talking about the need for the kind of confrontational strategies.
Right.
Has this been lost? Do we need to bring that back? Has the work already been done and we can rest on our laurels? Or what is your perspective?
Well, I think Before Columbus Foundation has always been there to protect the writers and sort of in the marketplace, as well as I mentioned before, protecting small press publishers that find themselves up against, you know, these larger corporations. Particularly Bertelsmann now owns everything. And 5 years ago, I started a war against Penguin, and it comes from, I think, my activism. You know, I've known Ishmael since I was 19 years old, and I came out of Cal Berkeley as sort of this literary activist. And 5 years ago, Penguin tried to publish No Boy by John Okada, the great Japanese-American novel, and they claimed that the book was in the public domain. And I said, that's not true, because my friends and I published that book in 1976 when nobody else would publish it. And And so I took them to task in social media, and they tried to fight me, and I accused them of stealing the literary property of a Japanese American family, the Okada family. John Okada has passed away in the 70s. And to make a long story short, lots of Asian American writers jumped into the battle. Entertainment lawyers, Japanese American entertainment lawyers, were offering pro bono work, and in the end, it was a copyright attorney and professor of international copyright, Jane Ginsburg, who came to our rescue. And it turns out that she's the daughter of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she proved that our copyright, the one that I took out at the Library of Congress, was still in effect. And Penguin had to back down, and then apologize to the Okada family, pay royalties for the books that they had sold, and also withdraw that book from distribution in the United States. And all of that strategy, I think, came from my decades of experience with the Before Columbus Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
You don't bow down, to that kind of monolith, especially, I'm a writer, I'm a novelist, I took on the largest publisher in the world. It's not a good professional strategy, but my novel's coming out next year, and not by them, but they I met the executive editor of Penguin Classics, and we shook hands and called a truce. But it was, it's something that I think we continue to do at Before Columbus Foundation, is to sort of be on the front lines of that kind of political as well as artistic strategy.
I want to mention, while you're talking about No Boy, we have the first 3 copies of Tar Baby magazine, which is published by the Toni Morrison Foundation. Her son, Ford, is the publisher. I'm the editor-in-chief, and Tennessee is the managing editor. And we have an interview with Frank Abbey in this issue that's out there, and the staging of No Boy in Seattle. It's a great. He was on Rachel Maddow's show the night before that.
That's right.
Yeah. I want to ask. Can I ask Gundars a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask Gundars a question myself.
Okay, well, let me ask it first.
I got a few answers.
Yeah, I got.
I want to ask you, Gundars. You fit in before all the European Americans into this group, and I'm wondering, your family living under Soviet or fascist authoritarian regime like the one we're living under now, drew you to these outcasts, like outcast ethnics?
Yeah, definitely. I'll speak to that because, as a child of refugees, I'm suspect on that count. I have to worry about whether they're going to send me back to the homeland now if I speak too much. So could you blank out my eye? But the thing is that I immediately took very, very sympathetic of things like, my people were indigenous and got taken over by the powers that be. And I looked at Native Americans and I said, I know exactly what you guys are going through. And, it was like, I have relatives back there and they said, well, we didn't have a Latvian name. She married somebody with a Russian last name. So they were okay. But she said, if your father had stayed here, you might not be here anymore. So I saw that there, but I also saw, with all the different cultures we had here, that I had more to do with them than I did with, mainstream white America. I remember one of my favorite things was as a kid, I'd go over to friends' houses and have dinner there, and I'd say, "Oh, they got all this weird, interesting food, like peas and carrots and potatoes, all cut into like-sized pieces, and it all comes together. And if you put salt on it, it tastes okay, And they always wanted to come over to my house because we had traditional Latvian cooking. Ishmael was there once too. One time he came by to pick up something, met at the house, and he said, "Oh, I don't want to interrupt you. There's a Latvian Bible study group, all the old ladies, and they always cook." Big feast and everything. And she said, "Oh, wait, you can't leave. You haven't eaten anything yet." So they dragged him in and sat him down and said, "Now you don't leave till you eat." And Ishmael was going, "But you're all white people. Why are you being nice to me?" But that was an interesting thing because when I learned about the whole idea of multiculturalism, I said that seems natural to me. And I look back at Latvia now; it's become a very multicultural country too. There are people from India, Japan, China, and they speak better Latvian than I do. And they're from outside. But the thing is here I used to have to go to conventions with Before Columbus Foundation, explain to people what the term multicultural meant. And they always thought, oh, well, it's a collection of minorities then, right? And I said, no, because we all work together. We're not just a collection of representatives that get to vote on things. We actually work together. And, we've had disagreements. We've argued our way through, and we're still all together like the best of families, Thanksgiving is for arguing with your family, and then the rest of the year, you're okay. And so I would explain to them that it's not just a collection of minorities. It's a matter of that we all work together. And what you were addressing, Justin, at the beginning was this idea of it's come sort of full circle now, where now everybody's saying, you stick to your own neighborhood. You go back to where you came from. They wanted to divide it all up again. I said, look at all the books here on the shelves. They're from all around the world. Or their origins are from around the world. That's the whole idea Before Columbus Foundation, was that the American literary tradition began before Columbus in all the different continents. And so when we get to the point now where we're trying to ghettoize again, we're trying to divide everything, and it sort of stands against us, and we have to be more concerted in our efforts to prevent that.
Very, very clear. Now you hold on to that because I can ask you a question. Thank you, John.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, we can share it.
You can share. I'll share one big family, something like that. And you said just. But let me tell you something. Now, when I began at the opening statement, I said that you were the engine that has kept Before Columbus Foundation moving forward for the past 50 years. That's a fact. That's not just praise. No one's trying to hype you up and gas your engine. It's just a fact.
Yeah, I spent last weekend doing the taxes for Before Columbus. Boy, talk about a headache.
So the point, there are no stars without a backstage.
Mm-hmm.
There's no such thing as someone who just shines without someone who is working in the background, someone who is toiling to keep the structure aloft, to keep it running. And that person has been you.
Mm-hmm.
So what comes out of that that's important to me is that you know what's in the closet. You know where the skeletons are buried.
Some of it's still in my closet. I'm not in there.
Well, you know a lot of things about the nuts and bolts and the daily grind, the grime and the grit of what is necessary, what must be done in order to keep an organization like this moving forward. And you've seen an awful lot of them come and go.
Yeah.
So when we talk about what is missing from the narrative today, between the point of inception of the Before Columbus Foundation, when there was such extraordinary unity among all of these different ethnic writers in the United States of America, and now, as you were emphasizing just moments ago, such extraordinary division and argument that only enhances and amplifies the violence that is prescribed by the fascist authoritarian government, which is destroying organizations like ours. Yeah. What do you think is missing? You've really seen it
Well, this comes back to the title of the book too, is that we've had our arguments and disagreements and things too,
Indeed.
fairly dramatic ones. But
Well,
the thing is you learn how to come.
To this moment?
Yeah, you come back together. It's sort of like, you know, how do you save a marriage? And I say, well, have you tried talking? And that's often the problem in all sorts of groups, is that nobody wants to talk. To the bottom of the up, they tried to teach corporations to say it's called management by walking around. It's where the CEO would actually go downstairs, walk the factory floor, and see what the life was like. Nobody wants to do that anymore. They don't want to get their feet dirty, you know. So I think the fact that we can stay together as a family. One of these days we should have Thanksgiving together.
Let's not push it. That goes far.
Yeah, Israel, you wanted to say something.
I always,
That was very gracious of you, by the way.
my half brothers are Chickahominy, and we had an event in Washington where we were celebrating the issue of Tar Baby, and they foresaw, or they postponed going to a powwow. I always kid them about Thanksgiving. I just want to put that in there. But Gundars and Justin,
Yes.
the Fort Columbus Foundation, the years can be divided between the Gundars years and the Damon years, because both of you guys have volunteered and are worth much more than we're able to pay you. Justin comes down from Sacramento, goes to the office, takes care of everything, manages stuff, does the American Book Awards. Gundars does the taxes and all some of the other accessories or other accessory duties that we have to fulfill. So they have really done it. Now I have to give a shout out to Victor Cruz. Carla and I met Victor Cruz when he was 18 years old, and he was his neighbors published a book of his, and I'm sitting in this bar, be my custom in the old days, and somebody comes in and says, "There's a kid around the corner. He's 18 years old. He's got a book out." So I went and met Victor. We got him published by Random House, Evergreen Review, which is back, incidentally. Evergreen Review is back online, and I went to his high school. I was part of something called Poets in the Schools.
Right.
And I said, one of the best poets is sitting right here. And I said, Victor Cruz, and some of the teachers got him walked out because he's failing Spanish. Victor now lives in Morocco and writes in 3 languages, Arabic, Spanish, and he's a real scholar. So when I got the money from the Ford Foundation, they said, well, you have to get a second person, a partner. And I chose Victor Cruz, and Victor Cruz is still with us. Now, I wouldn't say things are so dire. We've been together 50 years, Italian American, Irish American, right? Our president is a Muslim, Wajahat Ali. And so we're as diverse as you can say it. And instead of our having one U.S. Poet Laureate, we have 3 former U.S. Poet Laureates as directors. So I'd say that maybe on the ground level, people cannot get along, but writers seem to get along. As a matter of fact, I read that even during the Nazi period, Jewish and German writers were still in correspondence. So we have to somehow convey that to, right, the streets. Because unlike the film, writers show you the best of humanity and the worst. Where when we look at the media, which is being taken over by the right wing, you know, the Ellisons are buying CNN, which means that Trump will dictate what's going to be on CNN. They show us in stereotypes. That's why people are rioting against each other in the streets. It's because of politicians and the media. That's one of the reasons. But writers are able to think critically and get beyond all these stereotypes. So I want to say that Gundars and, you know, Justin and Sean. We've been together for I don't know how many decades. We have a lot of memories. You remember we got off the plane at 2:00 in the morning in Phoenix.
Yeah.
We got off the plane at 2:00 in the morning in Phoenix, and who was standing there alone? Horace Silver. Remember that? So anyway,
Well, I think
sure.
Let me
Yeah,
add.
please.
Let me add one more thing here. Speaking about changing the course of history, since we're at City Lights, I wanted to tell this one anecdote about Allen Ginsberg. Before Columbus Foundation, we've edited a lot of other books, anthologies. We did Norton publishers asked us to do two anthologies of American Book Award winners, both a poetry volume and a fiction volume. And so we co-edited, Gundars and Ishmael and I co-edited an anthology. And in the poetry anthology, we included one of our winners was Allen Ginsberg. And we went to the Miami Book Fair to announce it and do the big book launch. And I had compiled the anthology, and Ginsberg came up to me during the convention, the book fair, and said, "Hey, Sean, you know that poem of mine you put in the Before Columbus Foundation anthology?" And I go, "Yeah." He goes, "I think you left off the last page." And I'm standing there horrified, looking at Ginsberg, this institution, and I'm thinking to myself, the first thing I thought is his last name starts with G. We can't stick that page into the book because everybody is listed alphabetically. If his last name were Z, I think we could fix that. And then he says to me, and then I was thinking, how can you tell you left off the last page of a Ginsberg poem? And then he says to me, "I think it's a better poem, though." And I go, "Shoo." And I thought that was an incredible act of literary generosity by a major American poet. But Before Columbus Foundation has influenced literature in so many different ways.
We influenced Allen Ginsberg.
And
I'll
tell the other story about him because
we had a big fight over here. He took me over to Enrico's. Remember the restaurant used to be over there? Bought me lunch and cussed me out for about an hour because I had written a piece in the American Poetry Review, and it got a Pushcart Prize. And I was struck by something that Anne Waldman said in Time magazine was that Naropa was the center of American poetry. So I got a contract from what we used to call a girly magazine, We Magazine. They paid my way up to Naropa, so I wrote this piece about what was going on there. He really got upset. He cussed me out. I said, come on now, you guys are white-centric, or beatniks. I mean, so-called beat movement was, it was mostly they had token like Amiri and reluctantly Ted Jones and Bob Kaufman, but it was mostly a white movement. It was a misogynist movement. As a matter of fact, Ginsberg said, "It's not our fault that women didn't create geniuses." He said, we're all misogynists in those days.
Well, remember, we gave an award to Women of the Beaches.
Absolutely.
Book that stood in contrast to what everybody still thinks.
Well, absolutely. But I want to finish up here. So Bob Callahan talked to him because Callahan was enlightened. He knew everybody. He had contacts in the Hispanic community, Native American. He said, "You have to realize what's going on here, Alan," because Alan told Bob Callahan that I was thorny. I love thorny. I love being thorny. Before it was over, Naropa changed. Naropa became one of the most diverse scenes in the United States in terms of literature. And Ginsberg himself ended up teaching a black literature course at Brooklyn College, and I was one of his guests. So he changed.
Well, not long ago, I was talking about a particular philosophy which informed some of the cultural revolution and its greatest writers who were coalesced around before Columbus Foundation, and it had to do with the idea of literature as a vehicle of gaining and maintaining social and political, cultural, and economic power. I'd like to return to that because Ishmael, a few moments ago, you were speaking very directly to the idea, which I think is true, that writers do indeed read and listen to each other. And so as a result of that, are able to facilitate the kind of communications which would make that sort of thing possible. But I would like to take that a little bit further and get your take, well, all three of you really, on this particularly important point. If I'm looking at the writers which before Columbus Foundation was bringing together under one roof in order to distribute their work and give them the kind of foundation that would allow them to move on to more successful and larger audiences in their own careers, there's something that I encounter right away. And that is the very simple fact that the majority of these writers, including ourselves up here, come from communities in the so-called New World, in the Americas, as it were, who for, in some case, centuries, whose literacy was punishable by death. And I think it's common sense to say that if you're emerging from a cultural experience in which learning how to read and write can cost you your life, that your understanding of language is going to be very different than the Anglo-American dominant narrative that is suggesting to you that African-American history begins with the killing of Crispus Attucks. Mm-hmm. So while it's true that I agree, broadly about this statement about writers, I would say that there's something missing here. Certainly, it's true that writers are capable of bringing about this greater communication, of weaving a mirror from all of these shadows that might give us some fidelity about who we are. But it's also true that the writers who are most endowed with the capabilities of bringing that kind of light are people who are coming from backgrounds whose literacy was either banned or punishable by death. Why is that not taught and more emphasized? And obviously we've been doing that. But this particular facet of, the so-called American experience, why is this being left out?
You got a $1 billion thing called Hamilton, which praised the slave master.
Exactly.
I mean, that's Broadway, which is quite different from the 1960s when you had these knockout plays by Amiri Baraka and others, exactly. Ed Bullins. There's been a reaction to that. And so now Broadway, and I would say probably off-Broadway theater they are catering to people who can afford to buy tickets. Mm-hmm. So 72% of the people who are able to buy tickets dictate what's going on there. We have to spend a lot of money to get our plays on off Broadway. Mm-hmm. That's how we answered Hamilton, mm-hmm. and that's how we're stalking Hamilton around the world. Mm-hmm. So when Hamilton goes to New Zealand, I'm on the cover of the newspaper with my rebuttal to Hamilton. Right. And even after the New York Times, which is making a lot of money and getting a lot of revenue from Hamilton, indeed, even they finally said, yeah, well, he was a slave master. He owned slaves. Mm-hmm. That thing is still making money. Mm-hmm. So I think that's an example. Mm-hmm. In literature, after John Barth and all the experiments of the 1960s, 70s, mm-hmm. there was a big old Faulknerian revival.
That's true.
I said, reading Faulkner is like your eyes walking through bubble gum or something, So that's what happened with Ronald Reagan came in. Mm. And I think there was an article in Esquire about the end of postmodern literature. Mm-hmm. So I think the literature and the culture follows the politics. Mm-hmm. That's why we are considered, rebels. Mm-hmm. Now, one more thing. Mm-hmm. You got this DEI thing, and what else do they call it? DEI and what JB and blah blah.
DEI JB.
These people
get a plus sign after.
These people don't travel enough. You remember when George Bush was in power, and he couldn't identify the countries in Europe that he's visiting. I mean, if they go around the world, you'll find that black culture is the mainstream culture of the world. I mean, I watch a lot of, I shouldn't say this. You watch me. I watch cage fighting. And you see these guys in Thailand, in Belarus, entering the arena to hip hop music. Hip hop music is mainstream music of Italy. My daughter, Tennessee, just traveled through Europe with Susan LaPola, who's a hip hop performer in Italy. African American literature. There are people in Germany who know more about Asian American literature.
Right.
Germany, Freiburg, for example,
They know more about music too.
know about music than these people here. These people here, they have in Freiburg, they have a Cecil Taylor week. You know, Miles Davis goes to Europe. It's like the event of the season. But here, you know, traditionally jazz has been ignored and repressed. So I think if you look at, I went to a Sikh Kyoto in Japan. They have a Langston Hughes Club. In China, we went to 2 universities in China. They have 76 scholars studying African American literature, Asian American literature, Hispanic literature. It's only here where these people are provincial, led by a president, the dumbest president since Andrew Jackson, his mentor, you know. Yeah. Who just doesn't, they just don't know that it's over. It's like these, you remember the Japanese soldiers who didn't know the war was over and they were still fighting? That's the situation we're in. That's why I'm very hopeful, is because this will pass, and I think it's beginning to pass already.
Like I said, when I was visiting Riga, Latvia, and one of the places I visited was they have a museum out of it, and I think this is where you have to keep track of all the things that are the history that people are still trying to rewrite, like the Daughters of the Confederacy, who wrote all the history books, and they rewrote it, and people didn't know. You know, people today are still saying, I didn't know that was true. And I said, yeah, that got left out. But at the KGB prison in Riga, I'd say it was very educational, but it's also one of the most depressing things I've ever done, to see, you know, where they put people, what they did, and you could feel it in the paint on the walls. And one of the things they had there, too, was the downstairs. I didn't go that part of the tour because they said, that's really, you know, if you're sensitive, don't go down there. But one of the things they used to do is they went around and arrested a bunch of women whose crime was they would get together and have book clubs. And for the crime of having a book club, they got taken there and put away and tortured for like no reason. And this is a story that repeats in a lot of regimes all around the world. And right now we've got the museum that's the White House now, with all the presidents and their portraits with did you see the ones they installed now? Yeah, they were total revision of history of all the presidents. And I said, I thought we already had the revised history. I didn't know we needed to go to a 5th edition or something.
I was afraid of a Soviet invasion.
Oh yeah, they're scared. They're looking at. They're right along one side of the border there, and they know if Ukraine falls, there's no stopping it. And that's one thing that we have to realize. You know, with it used to be in movies, the bad guys were all Soviets, you know, Russians, and then they became CEOs, and they were the evil thing. And then for a while there, they were, and now we're trying to forget who's the bad guys. It's like the old Pogo thing, says we've met the enemy and he is us.
Well, there's certainly no question that the idea of capital punishment for literacy to this day still shapes and informs American policy on education coming from Washington, D.C. Would you agree with that, Sean?
Well, yeah, you just watch the news and the Department of Education, right, or non-education,
which is run by Linda McMahon,
right?
Former job wrestling,
right?
Federation.
Yeah, or defunding universities, pulling their research monies, things like that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, they had a piece in the paper the other day where they're no longer teaching entire books, like The Great Gatsby. that you get like a synopsis or something like that. What's going on there?
Already.
What's that?
It's short enough book already.
Right.
Not like we're making them read Ulysses.
Yeah, my colleagues were surprised that in my classes I require entire books for students to read, and fellow English professors, and I said, "What? You don't require students to read entire books?" And they go, "No, we just do excerpts." And I said, "No, I want students to read entire books. Actually, buy books." And students will ask me too. The required books on our syllabus, and they often ask me, "Where do we get those?" And I go, "At the bookstore."
There's no thing called the library.
Yeah, you want to?
Well, I know that at some point we want to open it up to a Q&A, but before we do that, I just want to very quickly return to a bit of ephemera from the very, very early days of the Before Columbus Foundation. And this is actually one of the very first events that was put on by the Before Columbus Foundation. And it's Harry Mullen, whose most recent book I deeply regard, and I hope that you will share it. A down-home reading, but this is at the Unitarian Church in Berkeley in 1977. But I want to point out something specifically, and that is Poetry and Disco Dance Party. Poetry and Disco Dance Party. Okay, can you dig that? Because part of what's happening here are writers who are insisting on the sensuous articulation of the imagination in the poem, that the poem itself should move the body to new horizons of freedom. You don't believe me? Go back and read the poetry itself. This is something I think that is really missing from the contemporary scene. That is the idea that the poem itself is a choreography to inspire the imagination and move the body towards new expressions of freedom.
Al and I were the first to publish Color Girls. Al Young and I.
Right, and Ntozake Shange
1984.
Really is a premier example of that, in which line and breath and body movement are all brought to one apotheosis. Ntozake Shange, you were the first to bring her into print.
1984.
Yes, 1984. So
let's use this microphone.
Okay, yeah, we have some question and answer.
Share the
Yeah,
the one you got there.
absolutely.
Sorry.
No problem.
So if you could raise your hand, and for those of you online, post your questions in the chat.
Yeah.
Peter, please.
Ishmael, to me, one of the foundational books for my reading as a reader and as a bookseller was 19 Necromancers from Now. And I would love to hear from you how you thought about that. What were your selection process? Who's the publisher you worked at? Because the copy that I have is a little mass market one, so it came out several years after the original publication. And then follow that up is, Sean, what was that impact of that book on you? And was that what brought you into Before Columbus?
Yeah, well, that was probably an early primitive version of a multicultural anthology. I went to Doubleday. I said, these critics are casting, black writers as a monolith, and I wanted to show the differences between different styles and approaches. And I think that's the only anthology where one of the forgotten founders of the Black Arts Movement, Charles Patterson, has a story. People ignore him, but he was very important in founding the Black Arts Repertory Theater. So I included Victor, Hispanic writer.
Frank Chen.
And then I came to Seattle and I read Frank Chen's The Chinese Lady Dies. I don't know whatever happened to that novel. It's about 1,000 pages. I don't know. Still unpublished. In an underground magazine called The Great Speckled Bird. And what Necromancers led to our meeting Sean and others at the party for Necromancers. That was a historic event, which was held at the West Coast representative of Doubleday, Luther Nichols' house in Berkeley, and Sean was there. Lawson Anata,
Alex Haley,
Jeff Chan, Richard Brannigan, and the whole group was there. So I think that was something, one of the seeds that led to the Before Columbus Foundation.
Thank you.
Got a question back here. If you hold on. Thank you.
It might be okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Anyway, there was a point that Mr. Reed and what is your name?
Oh, gosh.
Kudos. You were having a little exchange, and you referred to him as European American, and you referred yourself to white. So when you do that, there's a discrepancy between who you are and how other people see you. Then at one point, I found that if you're European American, there are different groups in Europe. And if you identify as white, then as representative of buying into the American dream.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't identify as white. Gundosh does not identify as white.
Yeah. Well, one of the things talking about history too, I always let people know I'm a Latvian, and they all know that, and I share my culture with them all the time. And one of the interesting things too is I always would tell people, I say, no, I'm not German, no, I'm not Russian. They take us over all the time, so don't confuse us. But I always tell people, Latvians, Lithuanians, and Estonians, they'll get taken over because they're like a package deal. They want, ice-free ports, so they take over Latvia, might as well take over Lithuania and Estonia. But the thing is we're a separate language group. We're not Slavic, we're not Germanic, we're not Romance. It's its own branch of Indo-European, which is called the Baltic language group. And so culturally, we're very similar. We have slightly different languages, but we're called Baltic. And so I always tell people I'm not any of those other things. I'm not just an Eastern European, I'm Baltic. And that's a cultural description. The word Baltic comes from the Baltic Sea, and it's named that because of all the whitecaps. So basically, you'd have to call me not white, but whitecaps. So.
You guys talk a lot about kind of the change in like literary education, both in terms of like reading whole books and in MFAs.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you're in a unique position that you've been reviewing the same themes of literature throughout the Cultural Revolution and now. Do you see changes in like the forms of stories that people use to discuss those themes over time?
Well, Ishmael, you've edited a number of short story anthologies in very recent years. He's asking about changes in form, if I understand the question correctly. You'd probably be best qualified to observe that.
It's hard to say. I read thousands of manuscripts, so I know there's a lot of talent out there. But I think that Elizabeth Nunez, the late Elizabeth Nunez, who was a Trinidadian writer, a great writer who didn't get the attention she deserved, she said that from black writers, the publishers want girlfriend books. I mean, I didn't say that. She said it, so that leaves a lot of us out. So I think that if you're looking at what the mass market does, I think it's probably they have niche, markets, and they cater to them. There again, the salesmen have taken over. I think with some of the online media that's happening now, that more voices can be heard, and probably some of the best writing are the blog writing. I mean, I don't know if people take that seriously, but there's some excellent writing in blogs. So I think maybe social media will expand the possibilities of good writers being heard. But if I look at the mass market, it's pretty dismal.
And you did.
Go on.
Well, I mean, if I may, I'm certainly not one of the most celebrated writers in American history, like my friend Ishmael here, but I think I can talk a bit about what it is that you're asking, and I do think that the impact over the last 70 years, particularly of broadcast technologies, has really, more than anything else, had enormous impact on form. Some of the writers who were most gravitated towards those changes and including them formally in their work, like John Dos Passos in the USA trilogy, have unfortunately been overlooked. But I think that the form, if you look at that particular trilogy of interpolating personal journals with what Dos Passos described as the newsreel, with also a dream journal, and the narratives of the characters who themselves were victims of their time and place, almost unobserved, were unaware of the forces of history that were Im- uh, imposing on them. I think that's something that you find more and more in contemporary literature in exciting in very fertile and imaginative ways. It's really an immensely positive turn that I think has been taking place.
I think that the novel is behind the paint, at least in black writing. The novel is behind the musicians and the painters.
Mm.
The painters and the musicians are much more innovative than the middle class novel that are being produced now. Except there are exceptions like Colson Whitehead, Paul Beatty, Victor Laval, and am I leaving somebody out? And what's his name? Percival Everett. They're making strides, and they have a different approach to storytelling. But I think the writers, the novelists, are pretty conservative, as opposed to the poets. I mean, like Amiri. And as a matter of fact, it was Gundars who published he published one of Amiri's books single-handedly, from the manuscript to the finished product, which was a cartoon, a book of his cartoons that he loved. He loved that book.
Un poco loco.
Right. Nobody would publish that book, no, because and we published another one of his books, City Poet Heroical, Satire in Hollywood. Got banned. So people don't make that. They're not as daring as they used to be in theater and in the novel. But the painters, I mean, black painters are way ahead all over the world.
Yeah, I just want to also mention that Ishmael was one of the first people to recognize Asian American literature as legitimate, and that's when in 19 Necromancers from Now, one of the most interesting things about the cover of that book was that it didn't say anything about the ethnicity of the people inside. It just said an original anthology of American literature. And at the time, in 1969, the only thing that was being published by African Americans had outrageous titles on them, like Black Fire, and everything was about the ghetto or things being on fire or people in prison, and there was nothing on the cover of that anthology that suggested, any kind of multicultural or Ishmael claimed it was original American writing, and that was it. And that he's right. That's when I first met him. He invited us to the publication party. I was an undergraduate, 19 years old. I show up at this party, and immediately included in the group. And even though I had not published anything, I'd been a writer for 1 year and a terrible writer, and his colleague Al Young, and I just started inviting me to things and read your work with us, and it was like jazz musician jam session. I was invited to, and even though my instrument wasn't I wasn't the kind of expertise at it yet, but they included me, and I've been there ever since as part of the group. And so it's and Ishmael, I edited the first anthology of Asian American literature, and Ishmael was one of the people who opened the door for that anthology, we got turned down by everybody, and until finally Howard University Press,
He also published Home Base.
yeah, he published my novel when no one else did, and then once it was proven that our book would sell and it got great reviews, then the commercial publishers jumped in and published it after that. But Ishmael and Yardbird Publishing and African American writers and university presses in general were the very first to recognize Asian American literature. And so that goes to speaking about recognizing new literatures and different forms and things like that.
Yeah, I want to say something about Richard Brodigan, Richard Brodigan also attended that party.
Yeah.
He was there. He was a guest in our home, Richard Brodigan. Contrast Richard Brodigan with the attitudes of some old-timer modernists like William Phillips, who sponsored the attack on Richard Wright. Remember that? I was on a board with the organization of William Phillips. He's the kind of guy, he commented about literature he hadn't read, just called it inferior, because we were trying to get Leslie Marvin Silko and Tony K. Bambara on the board, and he said they were not qualified. Of course, the following week, Tony K. Bambara had a whole page in Newsweek. Contrast that with Richard Brodigan. I said, Richard, you ought to read this book that was published in 1854 called Clotel or the President's Daughter by William Wells Brown, one of the early, still in print, 18 of faction, part fiction. Next time I saw Richard Brodigan, he was quoting from it. He was quoting from it. So contrast that with the closed mind that we have in this civilization, where you can't tell professors to change their curriculum. You can't edit certain books in the library. They put all the black books, not here, but in bookstores, they put them all in one section. So that's the kind of mind we need, an open mind.
Yeah. Paul Yamazaki.
Yeah. So Sean, so you were mentioning like the book that the Big IE that Charles Harris published at Howard University Press, and Harris had previously been at Doubleday and had been over at had founded Amistad and brought that down to Howard University Press.
Random House. Charlie Harris was at Random House.
Random House, not Doubleday?
No, he's at Random House.
Okay.
And,
I stand corrected.
And Toni Morrison took his job. You don't have to put that up. You don't have to put that up. You don't have to put
Yeah, he did Amistad.
But the question is, so you were mentioning John Okada and No Boy, and you were directly responsible for getting that book back into print, as many others. So could you describe the relationship that you have with the University of Washington, and like kind of what that relationship has been over the decades, and how Big IE kind of influenced that whole program?
Well, right. John Okada's No Boy, first Japanese American novel, and published in 1957 by Charles Tuttle Company, and it was published in an edition of 1,500 copies in 1957. And when I stumbled on the book looking for Asian American authors in 1970, 13 years after it had been published, an edition of 1,500 copies, it was still in print. So this is a novel that was completely ignored. And I read it, and Charles Tuttle sent me all the correspondence between him and John Okada. And I remember my colleague Frank Chin and I said, we got to find this author. We're young Asian American writers looking for our literary history. And when we did our literary research by looking at people's phone numbers up in the phone book. And you remember those things? They had your phone number and your address in there. And so we called John Okada's home, and his wife answered and informed us that he had died a few months prior. And we started this campaign of trying to get his book republished. And to make a long story short, everybody turned us down. It was Japanese America's only novel. And everybody turned us down. And then it takes place in Seattle. And so I contacted the University of Washington Press. I was just living down the street here. in North Beach, and University of Washington Press turned us down. And I said, but this novel is about Seattle. It's about Japanese American community. And they said, well, if you pay us $5,000, we'll publish it for you. You know, I'm 20 years old. I don't have $5,000, but I got mad. And I said, my friends and I said, well, let's give ourselves some money and publish it ourselves. And so we did. And we didn't really understand how to do that. But we got a quote. We got a graphic designer to design it for us for free, and then the printer here in San Francisco said it would cost $3,000 for 3,000 copies, and we managed to raise 1,500. And so the deal is, when you go to the printer, you give half down, and then you pay the other half. So we went to the printer. We paid them the 1,500. We did not have the other 1,500. And we had no prospects of getting the other 1,500. And like, man, it's going to be off the press in like 3 weeks. We got to find the money. And so I contacted the Japanese American national newspaper, the Pacific Citizen. And I asked I said, I can't afford an ad. But one of the columnists agreed to mention No Boy in his column. Oh. And he listed my address over here on Chestnut Street. And we said, if you send us you can buy an advance copy of this book, and we will give you $2 off the cover price, right? $2 off of $5.95 cover price. We did not know what we were doing. And the most amazing thing happened. Japanese America, which had ignored the book, suddenly wanted to read it. Mm-hmm. It was 1976. Its time had come, and we sold out the entire first printing of 3,000 before the book came off the press.
Great story.
I unfortunately had to mail all 3,000 copies from my apartment on Chestnut Street, and at Christmas time, which is a pain in the ass. And then we had enough money to go into a second printing, but we sold the entire first printing by mail to almost all Japanese American people. And then I moved to Seattle. I took the boxes of the second printing with me to Seattle, and a reporter in the Seattle Times interviewed me about the story of No Boy. So I trashed the UW Press in my first week of moving to Seattle. And they called me and they said, we'd like to meet with you. And I go, oh, no, And I go to this meeting, and the entire staff is sitting around the conference room. And the executive director stands up. I'm 27 years old. I don't know what I'm doing. And he stands up and he says, on behalf of the University of Washington Press, we'd like to apologize to you. No publisher had ever apologized to me. And he goes, we'd like to publish No Boy now. And I freaked out. I said, do you know what I went through? I said, I had to mail every single one of those copies myself at Christmas time. I have copies in the trunk of my Mustang, and I said, no, you can't publish it. Start publishing these other books. Toshio Mori's book, out of print. This other book, out of print. Nisei Daughter, out of print.
Eat a bowl of tea.
Eat a bowl of tea. And lo and behold, there's a theme here. I shamed them into starting to publish Asian American literature, and they did. And I eventually gave them No Boy, and the capper of this story is that in the 40 years that they've been publishing No Boy, they have now sold 280,000 copies of the book. 280,000 copies. And then recently, 5 years ago, I started my own book series at the University of Washington Press to continue the sort of literary activism, bringing books back into print that are out of print, things like that. So I've sort of never given up.
Peter, I know we're
Yeah, I was coming to a close. Do you have a final closing comment?
well, I was gonna. Did we miss anybody online? Oh, okay, okay. Well, we are at the end of our time, so just once more, I want to thank City Lights Books for being so generous and kind as to invite us here. Ishmael Reed, Sean Wong, and Gundar Strauds, and thank you to everyone who has been so gracious with your presence this evening, and buy the book. There's lots of them here. Thank you.